Back AP Psych. This is video number 2. This is on critical thinking about psychology, or thinking critically about psychology. In this section, it's going to be a little bit shorter than our first. Um, in it, there's a lot of terms I think you'll recognize and things you've heard of before. I hesitate to say that it is common sense, what we're going to talk about in this set of notes, because a lot of these things are going to challenge our common sense. And when we think critically, often we're overturning what we think to be common sense, especially in psychology. So we're going to go through some things that might challenge how we think and show us some common pitfalls that people have when thinking about things and how we can avoid those, so that we get all the knowledge we need from our psychological studies. So here we go. So some things to watch for and mistakes that can be made through critical thinking. Oftentimes when you use your intuition and common sense, that can lead you to making mistakes or thinking in ways like you knew something when you really didn't. The first thing to watch for is something called hindsight bias, right? Or I knew it all along syndrome. Okay, we've all been there before, plenty of examples of this. Often after we hear something or learn something, it seems familiar, so we think we knew it all along, right? Research often inspires and overturns popular ideas, so it often surprises us with its findings, right? And this is where we overturn common sense, right? Research can surprise us with what the results are, but many times people still say, "Oh, I knew that before we proved it. I knew that all along." So, for example, a couple things here. There's common sense that might tell you, don't give your 4-year-old sugar before bed, right? But research has actually showed us that sugar has no impact upon falling asleep for children, right? But that's a common sense thing that we think makes sense. Another example, let's say you have a friend who's dating someone that you don't necessarily like, right? And they've been dating for a few months, and your friend comes to you and says, well, Johnny cheated on me. And you're like, I knew it. I knew he was bad for you. I knew it all along. You might have had an intuition about it, right? But you didn't actually know it, okay? Hindsight bias. Another example, things to watch for in your thinking, being overconfident. We tend to think we know more than we do about subjects. And after we find out the real answer, we often convince ourselves that our initial response was still basically right. I was right about this part, or I was almost right, to make yourself feel better. For example, a lot of students who've taken Intro to Psych, the non-AP version, think that they're going to have a leg up on everyone else who didn't take Intro to Psych. When in reality, over half this class is new material, and most of this class goes much more in depth in the material, right? So you want to avoid being overconfident in your predictions and in the way you think. Other things to watch for: pseudoscience. Okay? I'm sure there's some of you out there who love your astrology signs and reading the paper or looking into what it says for the Taurus this month, or the Virgo or the Gemini, right? And we have to be careful with this, because these pseudoscience are popular ideas that seem to be related to science, when in fact the name pseudo means fake, right? These ideas seem to give insight into personality and future behaviors, yet do not stand up to scientific studies and findings, right? So we have astrology and psychics, these people who make money off of making it seem like their predictions and their things apply to people, right? Oftentimes, psychics and astrological predictions are very, very vague, and they can kind of apply to anyone based upon your perspective and how you think about it yourself. So that's another thing to watch for when we're thinking critically about psychology, pseudoscience. So how do we overcome these pitfalls like hindsight bias, overconfidence, pseudoscience? We have to approach psychology with a scientific attitude, right? And there's 3 aspects of this. So 1, curiosity. You have a passion to explore and understand without misleading others or being misled, right? So if you're approaching psychology with curiosity, that means you're probably taking this class because you're interested in the subject. You want to learn more. There's something about psychology that draws you to it. And you're really just interested in the subject itself, right? If that's you, you have a really high chance of being successful, right? Because you're naturally curious about the topic. And I encourage, hopefully, all of you to find something about psychology that you love. And I think you will, because psychology naturally applies to all of us, because it's all about the way that we think and behave. So there's going to be something that connects with you for sure. Second thing, skepticism. Ask questions, right? Good scientists, good psychologists, they don't accept things at face value. Okay? What do you mean? How do you know? Show me the evidence. Those are great questions to ask. And I encourage you to ask those questions throughout class. And we'll find the answers together. I know I don't know everything, and I love to ask these questions and find the answers. So I encourage you to do the same thing. If there's something we do in class that you think, why are we doing this? What is the meaning behind this? What makes sense to do this? Just ask, and I'll explain what the purpose of an activity is. Or ask me about a research study or just some random question you might have. And if I don't know, we'll find it together, right? But healthy skepticism is a good thing a psychologist and a scientist should have. And thirdly, humility. This goes back to that overconfidence section. Understand that we sometimes refute our own ideas because of conflicting evidence. Okay? You cannot be so attached to your own ideas that then you make yourself incorrect because you will not let them go. This is a huge challenge for many people because it's connected to our ego, right? If you admit that you're wrong, then maybe you're not as smart as you thought you were, or maybe you don't know as much as you thought you did. But in reality, that's a good thing, right? You're learning with every step. Every time you find out new information that goes against your common sense or the way you thought before, you're learning, you're becoming a better person, you're becoming a better psychologist. So curiosity, skepticism, and humility are the three key aspects of the scientific attitude that we try to take into psychology to make sure we avoid those pitfalls of critical thinking. Finally, bringing it back to critical thinking, critical thinking is the process of assessing claims and making judgments on the basis of well-supported evidence, right? Critical thinking is not common sense because common sense is not supported by evidence, right? We think critically so that we can know exactly what's true and what isn't and prove things. So our critical thinking is often done by asking 5 questions. What am I being asked to believe or accept? What evidence is available to accept? Are there alternative ways of interpreting the evidence? What additional evidence would help to evaluate the alternatives? And what conclusions are most reasonable? Okay. If you can think of those 5 things, as you go through the process of critical thinking, it's going to lead you down, hopefully, the correct path. And our last slide here. Overcoming these pitfalls, this all comes back to the scientific method. Psychology is trying to become more scientific with their approach always, right? For the longest time, psychology was known as like a soft science, and it falls into the social sciences. And when you're dealing with people, oftentimes it's hard to make concrete evidence in the way people think and behave. It's tough. So being as scientific as possible is a huge part of that for psychologists. Beginning with our theories. These are all things I'm sure you've learned in science class. Theories are testable explanations for a set of factors or observations. It is not just a speculation or a guess. Okay. Our main goal of psychological science is to develop explanations for behavior and mental processes. Explanations based on solid empirical studies. These would be theories, right? Empirical evidence you can measure, evidence that shows numbers and proof. With these theories, there are often hypotheses, which are the testable predictions. They allow us to test and reject or revise a theory. Such predictions give us direction in research. Okay, we're going to do some activities in this first unit surrounding hypothesis, as well as operational definitions and replication. As we get down here into operational definitions, this is huge. You're going to see this. I can guarantee it on an FRQ. Right? This is something we need to understand and know very well. So to make it easier to understand and evaluate their hypotheses, scientists often use operational definitions. Those are statements that define the exact operations or methods used in research. Okay? So when you're designing research or an experiment or some type of other method, operational definitions are vital. Operational definitions allow us to measure and exactly replicate an experiment or your research methods. Okay? So operational definitions make things measurable, right? They have to be able to be replicated. So you have to have specific measurable items in your research methods. Okay? This allows things to be replicated or allows for replication. Repeating a research study with different participants in different settings to see if the findings can be repeated. And when replication occurs hundreds or thousands of times within a research experiment or a study, then we know that it is statistically significant or something that holds water, that we can put our trust into as a theory, right? And that's how the scientific method works. Okay, hypotheses followed by operational definitions and replication, and that shows us that maybe our hypothesis was true, and the theory that it's based upon also holds weight. And that is how we can overcome these pitfalls in critical thinking and think scientifically in psychology.